All right, so we're diving into this case, and it's a weird one. A suspicious death, unanswered questions, and, well, it gets kind of absurd.
Sounds intriguing.
We're going to be looking at Lieutenant Hubert Chevis, died in 1931. Mysterious circumstances.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one. What's the angle for this deep dive?
We've got some excerpts from an article all about Chevis. See if we can uncover something new, a fresh perspective on this whole thing.
I like it. A fresh look at an old mystery. And what makes this one so fascinating?
Well, he was a British Army officer, seemingly ordinary life,
Mm-hmm.
but then his death. Anything but ordinary.
Yeah, it's that contrast that really gets you, right? The normal, everyday stuff right next to totally bizarre. Like, we're talking 1930s England, a healthy young guy, newly married, enjoying a summer evening, and then, bam, dinner turns deadly.
It really does feel like a classic mystery novel.
Totally. June 20th, a Saturday. The Chevises are having a cocktail party at their bungalow on a military base. Everything's normal. Until dinner.
Ah, yes. The infamous dinner.
Right. Their friends leave and they sit down for an early dinner. Manchurian partridge prepared by their cook. Fancy stuff back then. A real delicacy.
Not your average meal, then.
Not at all. But this fancy dish, well, it basically kicks off the whole tragedy.
So Chevis takes a bite of this partridge and immediately says, "It's the most terrible thing I have tasted." Strong reaction. His Batman even took the bird away. And get this, Mrs. Chevis, she tries a bite too, and yeah, confirms the taste is just awful.
So it wasn't just him being picky and then...
Things go downhill fast. We're talking violent cramps, convulsions, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds like poisoning.
Bingo. Doctors are called to the bungalow. Things escalate quickly, and he's rushed to the hospital, along with his wife. Remember, she tasted the partridge too.
Right. But she recovered, didn't she?
She did, luckily. Only tasted it. But he didn't make it. Chevis dies the next morning.
And they found poison.
2 grains of strychnine in his stomach.
Strychnine, classic poison. So murder. Open and shut.
Hold on. It's not that simple. There are a lot of weird details, like why did his wife survive? And then there's the telegram.
The telegram.
Yeah, the Ray telegram. It arrived on the day of the funeral for Chevis's father. But instead of condolences, it just said, "Hooray, hooray, hooray."
Hooray! What? Who would send that?
Signed, J. Hartigan. Sent from Dublin, Ireland.
Oh, this is just getting weirder and weirder.
You think that's weird. The police couldn't find any trace of this J. Hartigan. It's like he vanished.
So we've got a possible murder, a poisoned partridge, and a mysterious telegram sender. This J. Hartigan almost seems to be, I don't know, enjoying the mystery a little too much.
Yeah, it's like he wants to be part of the story, but from a distance.
Definitely adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing. So where do we go from here?
So we've got this weird poisoning, this J. Hartigan guy sending telegrams. It's like he wants to be part of the investigation, but, like, from the sidelines.
This whole case, it's full of these weird contradictions, you know? And actually, speaking of contradictions, let's go back to that partridge for a second. That poisoned partridge.
Yeah, what about it?
Well, the thing is, the investigators were really thrown by the fact that only one bird was poisoned. Just the one.
Makes sense. I mean, if someone wanted to poison Chevis, like, intentionally, wouldn't they poison both birds? To make sure both he and his wife were affected. It's such a specific detail.
Right. And that's what made some people think maybe it was an accident, like some stray pesticide or something got on that one bird. You have to remember, it's the 1930s. Food safety wasn't exactly top-notch back then.
I guess that's true. But wouldn't they have found something when they examined the partridge? Like some trace of whatever it was?
Well, that's where it gets even more confusing. There were no other poison birds. And the tests, they didn't find anything unusual, no traces of anything.
It's like the poison just magically appeared, which obviously isn't possible. So you're saying accidental poisoning. It's possible, but not likely.
Yeah, based on the evidence, it's not a strong theory.
Okay, so what about suicide then? Could Chevis have poisoned himself?
Well, the suicide theory, it's interesting, but, well, it doesn't really add up, does it? I mean, why choose such a public method right after a dinner party?
And wouldn't his wife tasting the partridge kind of ruin the plan?
Yeah.
If it was suicide.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, there's the telegram. That hooray telegram. Doesn't really scream planned suicide, does it?
I mean, unless he wanted to really mess with everyone, even after he was gone.
True. But it's a sketch.
Okay, so if it's not an accident, and it's probably not suicide, that leaves us with murder.
Yeah, and if it's murder, then the big question is motive. Who had a reason to kill Chevis? And who could actually pull it off?
Okay, let's start with motive. Who benefited from his death?
Well, the obvious answer is his wife. She inherited a lot of money when he died. Classic greedy spouse scenario.
So she was a suspect.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, she tasted the poisoned food and survived. That raised some red flags. But there's no real evidence connecting her to the poisoning, and she always said she was innocent.
Okay, so if it wasn't her, who else had a reason? Didn't the article say something about her first husband?
Ah, yes. Major George Jackson. And get this, he was a veterinarian.
A veterinarian. That's interesting. Why?
Well, think about it. He would have knowledge about poisons, maybe even access to them.
Like strychnine.
Exactly. Back then, vets used strychnine sometimes. For animals, obviously. So, naturally, the investigators looked into him.
Wait, so anyone could just get their hands on strychnine? Just like that?
Well, not just anyone, but it was easier to get than it is now. It was used for pest control, too.
Kind of scary to think about.
Yeah. But anyway, Major Jackson, he denied everything, said he had nothing to do with Chevis's death. And just like Mrs. Chevis, there was no evidence linking him to the crime.
It's like everyone had a perfect alibi.
It is suspicious, isn't it?
So, if we're going with the murder theory, how was only one partridge poisoned? Like, how is that even possible?
$1 million question, right. Some people think maybe the poison wasn't in the food originally. Maybe it was added later, like injected with a syringe or something.
Okay. That would explain why the other birds were fine and why they didn't find any poison when they tested the partridge.
Exactly. Plus, think about it. The birds were carved on a sideboard, not at the table. So someone could have tampered with the food without anyone noticing.
Sneaky. That's like a spy movie or something. Poisoning at a fancy dinner party.
Right. But if we're talking about a planned murder, like a really clever one, we can't forget about Jay Hartigan and those telegrams.
Yeah, those telegrams, they're the wild card in all this. What if he's involved somehow? Like, more than just a prankster?
That's the question, isn't it? Some people think he was an accomplice, sending those telegrams to throw off the investigation. Or maybe even just to taunt the police.
Or what if Jay Hartigan is the murderer? What if those telegrams, they're his way of making sure the case stays unsolved? Like, forever.
Like a confession, but one they can't trace back to him. That telegram about the mystery never being solved is definitely creepy when you think about it that way.
So we have an impossible poisoning, a mystery telegram sender, and an investigation that went nowhere. I mean, where do we go from here? It's like hitting a brick wall. It's like we've explored every single angle, but we're still stuck with the same question. What actually happened to Hugh Chevis? Was it some freak accident? Or was it intentional, like revenge or something? Or is there something else we haven't even considered?
That's what's so fascinating about these cold cases, right? No clear answers. And that just makes you want to figure it out even more. I mean, everyone wants closure, right? You want to put the pieces together, even if you don't have all of them.
Okay, well, let's see if we can at least make some sense of the theories we do have. Accidental poisoning, suicide, murder. We talked about them all, but they all seem to have more problems than answers.
Exactly. Like, take the accidental poisoning idea. Sure, it could have been an accident, right? Contaminated food, a mix-up with chemicals, something like that. But the evidence, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, the fact that only one partridge was poisoned, it's just too specific, isn't it? Hard to believe it was just a random thing.
It is. And that brings us back to, well, intent. If it was intentional, who would do it? And how?
The suspect list isn't very long. There's Mrs. Chevis, but she just doesn't seem like a killer, even though she got all that money.
And then there's Major Jackson, the vet. He definitely knew about poisons. But again, no evidence.
It's like whoever did it, they knew what they were doing. And they were really good at covering their tracks. No witnesses, no traces of poison, just one poisoned partridge and, well, a dead man.
Makes you wonder if we're missing something, some tiny detail, something the original investigators missed or thought wasn't important.
Yeah, maybe. Something that seems insignificant, but could be the key to the whole thing.
It's possible. And nowadays, with all the new forensic technology, who knows what they could find? DNA, toxicology, things they couldn't even dream of back then.
Imagine a modern investigation. Maybe there's a fingerprint, a hair, something they overlooked.
And then there's Jay Hartigan and those telegrams. I mean, what if those hold the answer? What if it wasn't just some random guy messing around? What if he was trying to distract everyone?
Maybe. Or what if the telegrams are the key to his motive? Something the investigators missed all those years ago.
Yeah, like a hidden message or code, something a modern codebreaker could decipher.
Like we have a map, but it's full of riddles and dead ends.
True. But even the toughest mysteries can be solved with a little bit of luck and some creative thinking.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the mysterious death of Hugh Chevis. But before we go, we want to leave you with something to ponder. If you were investigating this case, where would you start? What would you focus on? What questions would you ask? Maybe you'll uncover something that everyone else has missed. Until next time, keep those detective minds sharp.